Welcome to a video entitled IDisposable Example. Now in this video I want to try to tie it all up, all this information that I've been talking about, and this started in a video entitled Understanding Garbage Collection. Then we moved to using IDisposable. Then we talked about the destructor in a video entitled the finalize method. And so now I want to show you the code when we implement IDisposable based on the pattern that Microsoft recommends. So the best way to do this, and the reason that this looks a little differently, I've given you an IDisposable example. So if you go out there in your work files folder, find the IDisposable example folder, open that up, and you'll see something very similar to this. We want to find the Microsoft Visual Studio solution file, the .sln file, and just double click it. And that's going to open up Visual Studio to this particular project. Now, I don't have anything working in here, but what I do have is the pattern that Microsoft wants you to use. Now, I want you to notice this, and we're going to talk about this just briefly here. And I hope this will make the light come on. Notice, this is the class that you have created that does whatever you want it to do. Now, once you implement IDisposable, there's going to get a little bit more complicated things going on here. First of all, the only thing that the IDisposable really requires is this right here, the public void dispose method. And this is where we should dispose of unmanaged resources, all right? However, we've already talked about we can dispose of managed resources, but if we do that, that can create a problem because of the way the finalizer works and so forth. So let's talk about how this gets implemented. First of all, you're going to notice there is a private Boolean type up here, a variable called disposed, and we're going to set it equal to false right off the bat. And this is what we're going to use to determine how we're going to dispose of things. Now, in our public void dispose, we normally would have written some code here to release our unmanaged resources. However, we can put code here to release managed resources as well. And so what we're going to do is, if you remember, the finalizer gets us confused here because it kind of accidentally calls this. And if we've already cleaned out our managed things, we don't want that to try to happen again because they're probably already gone. So here's what we're going to do. In the dispose method that's required by the IDisposable interface, and actually there it is right there, we're going to simply call dispose and we're going to pass true. All right. Then keep in mind, we're also, once dispose runs down here, okay, and this is, if you remember, I talked about that third method. It's this one right here. It's the dispose with a Boolean parameter, a Boolean argument being passed in, okay? And so we're going to call that right here passing in true. Now, once we've done what we're going to do, we're going to take care of some managed objects and some unmanaged objects. We're going to jump back up here. The code will return right here, and then it's going to run gc suppress finalize, and this will tell the garbage collector, hey, don't worry about any managed objects on this particular object because we've already run dispose and we've taken care of those. All right. So when this is called here out of the dispose method, notice it's called, it passes in true. All right. And if we're not already disposed, and disposed is false, then if disposing is true, then run the code to dispose of managed objects. If disposing is false, then don't run the code to dispose of managing objects. So if disposing, if whatever was passed in is true, it's going to run the code that we write right here to free our managed objects like database connections, large .NET objects no longer needed. And I hope in my fast talking here, I haven't confused you. And I talked about freeing managed objects and unmanaged objects like database connections. It depends on what database you're connecting to. In some instances, for example, your ADO.NET connection objects can be managed here and you can free those. So you'll have to kind of do some investigating on whether you're working with managed objects. And I hope I haven't misspoken. Don't let me confuse you on this. You'll just have to know whether you're doing managed or unmanaged objects. Now, notice when you call dispose right here, and you call dispose, even if it's true, the true only determines do we do our managed objects. Whether it's true or false, we are always going to run this code right here to free our unmanaged objects. This is what prevents the memory leaks, okay? Once that is done, we set disposed equal to true, all right? So we're going to set our disposed variable up here equal to true. And so now we can always tell that disposed has been run. Now remember the base constructor or the finalizer that I said we would create? Notice we implemented this since the name of our class here was base. We implemented our destructor as tilde base, and notice this is the finalizer as far as the compiler is concerned. This is only called by the garbage collector process when it runs, and the dispose method will never be called on this object if the finalizer is running it, okay? This method should release the same object references that the dispose method would release if it had been called. Therefore, we don't want the dispose method to be called again if the garbage collector called this method. So we simply say dispose false. And so dispose false will jump up here, and notice if it's not disposed, then run this. If disposed is false, then it's not going to happen, okay? Then we have this nice little code here. If you're working with a derived class that's derived from the base class, we want to make sure that we have a protected override on that dispose bool so that we're calling it on the proper class, okay? Go through this very slow. Make sure it makes sense to you. Keep in mind, since we implemented IDisposable, all of this is going to be included in our class over and above any functionality that this object provides anyway, okay? So just kind of keep that in mind. But that is what's happening in garbage collection. I hope I've cleared this up and not confused you. Watch this group of videos over and over, and it'll slowly start to make sense. But this is how all these pieces and parts in the IDisposable world fit together in the garbage collection process. I hope that's helped.